Being the antithesis is no easy task. An antagonistic villain like Eggman requires dastardly inspirations that are unequal to his opposition's gallant ones. To build an image in a mirror, one must look at the reflected. Sonic is a lover of nature, therefore Eggman must see it as vile and disgusting. Sonic has a lot of friends and is companionable. Therefore Eggman must be all alone and must push away all things that seek to be his companions. He must go so far that the only thing approximate to kinship that he will ever feel will come from the things he creates. He must go so far as to only see other living beings as tools or threats. And because Sonic is a champion of chaos, therefore Eggman must be a champion of law. Being the villain and antagonist for most of the Sonic games means that Eggman must have nefarious desires, along with core weaknesses and flaws that make him defeatable. Thankfully, the games show us blatantly what Eggman's biggest weakness is: his ego. From the very beginning, Eggman's ego has been on display, only becoming more and more prominent as the games go on. Robots forged in the mockery of nature, his largest and grandest projects having his likeness plastered front and center on their designs. Eggman is not a man of subtlety, for he believes himself the mecha messiah of a coming age. To do anything less but announce his imminent triumph would be a disgrace to the history books. The first inspiration I have for Eggman is Vladimir Harkonnen from Dune Book 1, and technically Book 3, but I won't go into that because spoilers. The best way I can show you why I have chosen him as an inspiration is to show you what kind of man the Bloody Baron is. The following is an excerpt from Dune. "Uncle," said Feyd-Rautha, "you said there'd be something important here for me to—"
"Listen to my nephew," the Baron said. "He aspires to rule my barony, yet he cannot rule himself."
The Baron stirred beside the globe, a shadow among shadows.
"Well then, Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, I summoned you here hoping to teach you a bit of wisdom. Have you observed our good Mentat? You should have learned something from this exchange."
"But, Uncle—"
"A most efficient Mentat, Piter, wouldn't you say, Feyd?"
"Yes, but—"
"Ah, indeed, but he consumes too much spice. Eats it like candy. Look at his eyes. He might have come directly from the Arakeen labor pool. Efficient, Piter, but he's still emotional and prone to passionate outbursts. Efficient, Piter, but he still can err."
Piter spoke in a low, sullen tone. "Did you call me in here to impair my efficiency with criticism, Baron?"
"Impair your efficiency? You know me better, Piter. I wish only for my nephew to understand the limitations of a Mentat."
"Are you already training my replacement?" Piter demanded.
"Replace you? Why, Piter, where could I find another Mentat with your cunning and venom?"
"The same place you found me, Baron."
"Perhaps I should add that," the Baron mused. "You do seem a bit unstable lately, and the spice you eat—"
"Are my pleasures too expensive, Baron? Do you object to them?"
"My dear Piter, your pleasures are what tie you to me. How could I object to that? I merely wish my nephew to observe this about you."
"Then I am on display," Piter said. "Shall I dance? Shall I perform my various functions for the eminent Feyd—"
"Precisely," the Baron said. "You are on display. Now, be silent."
He glanced at Feyd-Rautha, noting his nephew's lips, the full and pouting look of them, the Harkonnen genetic marker, now twisted slightly in amusement.
"This is a Mentat, Feyd. It has been trained and conditioned to perform certain duties. The fact that it's encased in a human body, however, must not be overlooked. A serious drawback that I sometimes think the ancients with their thinking machines had the right idea.
They were toys compared to me, Piter snarled. You yourself, Baron, could outperform those machines.
Perhaps, the Baron said. Ah, well.
He took a deep breath, belched. Vladimir Harkonnen is a hypocrite. The Bloody Baron cautions others against self-indulgence and letting their emotions and base instincts hold sway over their actions, and yet is morbidly obese and is careless with what he does, especially if it is immediately gratifying, like a burp or a rush to anger. Like the Bloody Baron, Eggman will warn others not to underestimate their enemies, yet consistently underestimate Sonic and his friends, and others in general for that matter. Eggman will foil his own plans if it means satisfying an immediate desire. This is also why Eggman's successful plots will be few and far between, as his desire to see the Blue Rat crushed will outweigh his long-term desire to succeed. That is not to say that Eggman is not brilliant, for both Harkonnen and Eggman are brilliant men, but it is what they choose to do with that brilliance that makes them evil, and also what makes them fail. Baron Harkonnen also has a tendency to look down upon others, but being a Baron has a desire to continue his great house's name. The Bloody Baron desires to groom an heir out of Feyd-Rautha, picking him specifically because Gluso Beast Raban was exactly that, a psychotic man-child who threw his aggression at everyone around him like a tyrant. But Feyd, the younger child, was a lot more cunning and controlling of his emotions. It was these perceived similarities to himself that made the Baron plot to maneuver Feyd into being the heir of his house. How this will relate to Eggman will be explored in a later issue, but rest assured, it will become important to this story. Harkonnen is also a very ambitious man, but to not give spoilers to the story of Dune, which you should read the first 4 books of, all I will say is that if Harkonnen was able to complete his plans, then his bloodline would never have to want for anything ever again. The next inspiration for Eggman is my desire for him to be a champion of law, opposing Sonic, who is a champion of chaos. It should be noted that just because someone is a champion of law or chaos does not mean that they are aware of their role. Most champions never learn of their chosen status, and I believe both Sonic and Eggman may discuss law versus chaos on a philosophical level, but will never jump to the conclusion that they are champions of their respective causes. When discussing law versus chaos, it is important that we remember that humanity tends to view law more favorably than chaos. This even more so applies to people who have lived in cities for most of their lives. Humanity has a tendency to tolerate a life under the boots of tyrants far more than a life balanced by their own 2 feet. It is because of this that we must remember that law versus chaos does not describe or prescribe good or evil. From this, it is important to remind ourselves that law can be as much of a force of disorder as chaos can be. Eggman, being a champion of law, takes the ideas law represents and personifies them: singularity, tyranny, and unity. As long as all follow the Eggman, are of the Eggman, and are the Eggman, all will be well. It is these lawful tendencies that sway Eggman to plaster his likeness onto everything and the impulse to perfect nature by creating mockeries of it. And it is his lawful mind that tells him that yes, His way is the only way to bring humanity into a new age of reason with his technology and genius. But as all lawful creatures must have chaotic tendencies, so too does Eggman. Eggman's chaos is threefold. The first is that when he enacts his plans, he brings chaos to the realms he visits for the sake of law, but to the locals, he brings a great change to their natural order, imposing his own. The second aspect of chaos Eggman brings is his impatience. He will not always think through a plan completely. Instead, he will have an idea that catches his fancy, work on a machine to achieve his objective, and then let it loose to do his bidding without thinking of the consequences. This also goes for his numerous explorations of the primeval and primordial, tampering with powerful things he never fully understood the purpose of until far too late. If not for Sonic, Eggman would have destroyed the world long, long ago. The third aspect of chaos Eggman embodies is curiosity. Eggman loathes nature, yes, but he also understands that nature is a tool, as is everything else. And a tool has its uses. If wielded by Eggman, all tools will be used to bring about his dream of a great future, of Eggman Land. Curiosity is the driving force behind Eggman's actions. His robots are his eyes, ears, and hands in the search for these ancient tools. The penultimate inspiration for Eggman is malevolent industry. The conflict of nature versus technology is practically venerable now, achieving relevance since the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. It should be important to note that Eggman does not represent technology and industrialization as a whole. Instead, he only represents those who go out of their way to destroy nature for the sake of profit, power, and prestige, and in Eggman's case, technology. Eggman isn't the common man who drives a petrol car, has a home power generator, or even a man who doesn't recycle. Eggman represents the deep evils of industry, deforesters, deep-sea oil drillers, and private jetters, the people who are actually polluting and harming the planet with their actions and inactions, leading them and everyone else into a doomed planet, or to sate their desire for the material. But there is one key difference between those villains and Eggman. The villains of our world wouldn't say something like, "I hate nature," as that is a bad public image and not very marketable. I hate nature is Eggman's image, as Eggman's ego requires that everyone shall know his intentions. Eggman's passion, his hatred for nature, is why Eggman's robots are shaped in mockery out of things of nature. The last inspiration I have for Eggman is Mr. Freeze from Batman the Animated Series episode Heart of Ice. While there are other Mr. Freeze-like characters in fiction and in real life, for myself, Mr. Freeze is the most obvious way to do a sympathetic villain. You understand why the villain does his evil. You may even sympathize with his cause. But his actions are what make him evil. After all, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. In a world of gods and monsters, a man must take, no, snatch, every advantage he can grab. Villains are always interesting to write for, because you're writing for the antithesis of your message. A good villain requires a storyteller to know their message so well that they know and understand the opposite point of view. That is not to say a good villain must have sympathetic points of view. Rather, the writer must understand why someone would hold the opposite points of view to the message they were trying to convey. and have someone or something embody those traits. On one end of the spectrum, you have villains who are the antithesis with no merit. That is to say, they are the villains, but their side is understandable only in that they are an evil that must be destroyed, such as Sauron from Lord of the Rings. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have villains whose counter-message, while not completely correct, holds their own level of truth and perhaps holds a piece to the true message of the story. After all, a villain is also a character that exists to help push the message of your story, often acting as the very thing the storyteller is warning against. A good example of a sympathetic villain is Senator Armstrong, with even the final boss theme acknowledging that Raiden partially agrees with Armstrong's message, but not his methods. There are many villains who fall between these two extremes, and many more that are without as well, but that's a conversation for another time. As Eggman represents law, which in and of itself is not evil, Eggman must embody some counter-messages that the viewer should consider. This is why Eggman will have understandable motives, but his actions are so extreme that they go far beyond acceptable in the pursuit of his goals. Eggman's goals are tied directly to his backstory, which will be an enigma to the viewers at first, with only bits and pieces of his backstory being given. But like all things in this outline, there will come a point where his backstory will be told in full, and the viewers will know exactly why Eggman is the way he is. But the viewers will know his motivation, a future of technological utopia. It will in no way justify his actions to anyone else, but to himself, it's a worthy cause. Eggman is a dreamer, and in his eyes, the ends justify his means, if it means achieving those dreams. A dream of humanity surpassing its need for nature. A dream of a utopian world of technology and advancement. A dream of perfection. A dream of the Eggman Empire. Eggman's biggest flaw, most evidently, is his ego. It is the source of his impatience, his pride, and his desires. He is the Eggman. His plans are flawless and will succeed, for he is the greatest genius of his time. Failures, therefore, are but mosquito-sized blotches in the history books that will be forgotten in the millennia to come. It is also this ego that makes him a man-child. Someone who is sick of waiting for what is rightfully his to bring about, and why he is extremely temperamental against those who stand in his way and succeed in stopping him. To speak more of the who of Eggman, I must speak of spoilers not only for Eggman, but for the world and even for other characters. In a poetic mirroring of Sonic's backstory, where the hedgehog was raised isolated and naive of the world, Eggman's backstory is tied directly to the world, and specifically its recent history. I will not be giving multiple spoiler warnings like I did in Sonic's character video. All of the following will feature a great many spoilers, not only for Eggman's backstory, but also for the greater narrative of Ultimate Sonic. Skip ahead to the end of the next section, or to this timecode if you do not wish to be spoiled. The wheel of time turns, and ages come and pass. Truth turns to history. History turns to speculation, and speculation evaporates when the parents are ashamed to tell their children the truth. The story of the Eggman begins in another time, a previous age, with a boy named Ivo Robotnik. Ivo was a gifted child. From an early age, he showed a profound understanding of mechanical engineering, especially in the field of robotics. He would often invent and create small machines to help him do menial tasks that he didn't want to do, meaning most of his earliest robots were for cleaning. By the time Ivo entered formal education, he was heralded as a child prodigy for his mechanical marvels. Everyone, from those who purchased his robots to the masters of robotics and everyone in between, told Ivo that one day his genius and inventions could and would change the face of the world. The sounds of those praises reverberated deeply within Ivo. From a young age, Ivo Robotnik was instilled with the grand idea of a coming golden age that he would be the face of, an age of technological utopia. By his third year of education, Ivo spent more and more of his free time at the local University of Technology, which he quickly became a mascot for. Even at his early ages, he was well known for borderline harassing both students and professors with questions on robotics that even they had a hard time answering. But whatever stumped Ivo enough to get him to ask questions, he would return the week later with answers. This genius, once more, led Ivo to receive more and more praises, and so his ego bloated. But there was one problem that faced Ivo. Despite all their praises and adulations, he could tell that no one really took him seriously. And he came to realize that it was because he was still a child. Ivo began counting down the days until he would be old enough to be considered an adult. Every time he woke up, he was one day closer to the technological utopia that he could see was just over the horizon. Still, Ivo wasn't a very patient boy. He knew everyone already agreed with him and worshipped him as a genius. They loved and adored his passionate speeches of a better tomorrow, a world free from hard labor, injustice, and suffering, where anything and everything could be at your fingertips after a few simple commands. And yet, they still withheld the keys that would let him dictate to that future. The future they love to hear about, but don't seem too much in a rush to get to. Then everything started to change. It was all so subtle and slow at first, so slow and so subtle that the mind of a child, even that of a genius, didn't fully comprehend what was going on. What Ivo did understand, like all children can, is the emotions of his family. One day, a thread of terror had twined around them and had never let go. Eggman would later learn in greater detail what he saw on the TV that fateful day. It was news coverage of the destructive aftermath of a Guardian Units of Nations space radar station. The dish had been shattered, all the computers had been smashed, and the questions on everyone's lips were who and why. Despite warnings being issued and armed guards being set up at the other stations, the second and third attacks were also successful. 2 more great white dishes pointed heavenward had been struck down upon the Earth. What these 2 attacks caused was not only terror, but also confusion. This was because these gun outposts had been set up all across the globe on completely separate continents. And yet the way the destruction had been dealt made it seem like all these attacks were linked and coordinated. Ivo was interested in the numerous conspiracies that popped up, more for playful speculation than actual discussion. The talk of aliens, monsters, or demons was on everyone's lips. While Ivo found the supernatural fascinating, he didn't believe in all this talk of aliens. After all, for the aliens to have gotten close enough to destroy the radar dishes, they would have had to have been spotted in the first place. And then there's also the fact the Space Colony Ark has the best scientists on board, constantly running experiments and observations in space. They would have spotted any aliens years before they could have landed on the world. As the wheel of time turned, news became old news, and as no new attacks had been reported, people went back to their lives, some delving into conspiracies, others wondering what was so wrong about peering too much into space. But there was a darker truth to what was really going on. This truth was suppressed as much as possible by Gunn, a suppression so great that when Station Square was invaded, no man, woman, or child was ready. The battle was televised all over the world, and Ivo got front row seats watching it all unfold on his family's TV. All of them watched on in horror at the battle, but Ivo distinctly remembers a sense of fascination welling inside of him. The invasion force was made up of entirely primitive echidnas that had appeared suddenly from within the mystic ruins. These barbaric and savage people created a red wave of destruction, destroying every technocars, servers, computers, and seemingly any other form of technology that they could get their hands on. The news footage was sporadic and hazardous, as it became increasingly common for the cameraman filming the battle to suddenly have a spear thrown towards them, shortly followed by their feed being cut short. It was made no secret just how devastating this battle was by the media. There was still a slight confusion that plagued Ivo's mind, and most likely everyone else's as well. It is well known that more often than not, the Anthrofolk were gentle and passive creatures with only a few bad eggs. But to have an entire military force that could wrought so much destruction should have been impossible. And yet, the impossible was being shown on every news station and more. The motivation for the battle became clearer as time went by. The random rampages and destruction were not, in fact, random. They were highly coordinated by the echidnas. Every building they entered was an electronic store, an office building with computers, or something else to do with technology. The response from Gunn was too slow to stop major damage from being done. In fact, their arrival and combat with the echidnas proved just how futile their presence really was, especially to the impressionable Ivo. While the gun units had guns, tanks, and airplanes, and all sorts of ordnance, and their enemies had spears and slings, the raw strength and overwhelming tactics of the echidnas proved to be beyond absurd. Each echidna fought simultaneously like a wild beast that had been cornered, but also as masters of the martial ways, quickly figuring out how to take out tanks and even aircraft using their battlefield ingenuity and what they had available to them. The echidnas had more than just strength and tactics to help them, as their bodies were able to take numerous high-caliber bullets without even bleeding, as if their skin was wrought of ceramic body armor, but without the downsides of being brittle or heavy. Another advantage the echidnas had were their speed and reaction times, as they could push themselves to be so quick after perceiving threats that only the fastest of bullets or the first few shots of a gun could land on target. There was even footage of a soldier firing a rocket launcher at a group of them, but by the time the rocket had exploded on the ground, every single echidna had dispersed. The Battle of Station Square lasted 3 whole days, the echidnas never tiring at all, and reportedly taking advantage of the tiredness of the soldiers after nightfall to go and destroy even more technology. The battle's climax took place at an odd but fitting location: the Station Square University of Science and Technology. Ivo can recall the next 2 hours with stark clarity. The echidnas, while overwhelming, weren't invincible, and had taken numerous casualties over the course of the 3 days-long battle. It's believed that the first hour of the siege was a standstill because they had taken more casualties than expected, although that was only speculation. The reason it was a standstill was because Gunn had realized that the university would have been a prime target for the echidnas, and so had turned the campus into a fortress that had actually caused the echidnas to pause and regroup. While Ivo was watching the calm before the assault, in the far distance of his awareness, he could hear his father comforting his mother, as Ivo's uncle and Earthbound grandfather both lived in Station Square. Their whereabouts and whether or not they were deceased was unknown, and they hadn't been able to make contact with them since the battle started. That worry felt like such a trivial and distant thing that he was barely aware of. As the first hour went by, the greatest gathering of echidnas that had been seen since the start of the attack had encircled the campus. Neither side seemed to move, as if the TV had become a still painting an artist had rendered to capture the feeling of dreadful anticipation. Then, the red levee broke. Ivo Robotnik, unknown to even him, had believed in his heart that the realm of academia was undefilable, that no one, nothing, would want to destroy the realm of research and progress, the realm of the betterment of the future. He believed in his heart until the very end that the army or the scientists or someone would have figured out a way to defeat the echidnas. But when the Station Square University of Science and Technology had been reduced to ash and rubble, Ivo became a very still and very empty child. Even when his parents eventually sought out counselors and psychiatrists, nothing they did helped Ivo. Perhaps it was because they were child counselors who were not used to dealing with a boy with the mind of a genius. After the Battle of Station Square, the whole world had been swallowed by terror. But while many were trying to start the grieving and recovery process, the head of the Spokesman's Committee for the Guardian Units of Nations, on behalf of the United Federation, announced to the world that the supposed silence from the echidna threat was actually a false one. He revealed that for the past year, the echidna warriors had been going around the world destroying hidden scientific bases. The last hidden science base had been destroyed a week before the Battle of Station Square. And as the threat seemed to be targeted only towards the hidden bases, Gunn saw fit to cover up their embarrassing failures instead of informing the United Federation and its people. The speech wasn't long, but it made one thing clear. These echidna warriors were targeting places of science and technology first and foremost. Therefore, the technoclast versus technophile schism was inevitable. It was a new and fresh debate, but also one as old as civilization itself. On one side, you had the technoclasts, who believed that the echidnas were an unstoppable force who were going to continue going around destroying any and all technologies they could find. They believed a Butlerian jihad was the only course of action, and it would have to be done soon and fast so the echidnas would not have a reason to return. On the other side, The technophiles tried to counter the technoclasts' claims that the echidnas wanted a Balerian jihad, let alone that they were a force of nature that was unstoppable. Ivo was amongst the technophiles, but even if he was a prodigy, he was still a child with a child's voice. Ivo would believe that if he were an adult at that crucial moment in history, he could have at least saved his own city. The Echidna War made the people of the United Federation lose all confidence in Gunn, and even in the Federation itself. What happened next, if it hadn't been covered up so well, could have made that lack of confidence turn into a rage. Ivo, or anyone who was not a part of Gunn or the United Federation's top government, had no way of knowing about the assault on the space colony Ark. Through a whistleblower, Gunn found out about General Robotnik's clandestine activities and his dealing with aliens behind the backs of Gunn and the UF. Even with limited information, Gunn deemed a raid of the Ark absolutely necessary for the interests of humanity. No one really knows the truth of why the raid happened, but some speculate some of the top bureaucrats of the UF or Gunn were not liking how much free reign Gerald had on his ultimate lifeform project. And with the cover of the Echidna War and the Technoschism being on everyone's mind, covering up a raid using a false flag operation wouldn't have been as difficult as it would normally have been, as everyone has their eyes on each other and not towards the heavens. Without fanfare, the greatest location of scientific advancement had been raided and shut down with excessive violence. Researchers, their experiments and their families were brought back down to the world, along with a few hundred body bags. The men of Gunn programmed the Ark to maneuver itself behind the moon, always hidden from the world so that the people would eventually forget. They took as much from the Ark that they could, but the larger experiments and structures were deemed too costly and heavy to transit back to Earth, and so they were left alone in the cold, empty halls of a forgotten space station. What happened to Gerald and his research is a story for another time. It was only a few months after the raid on the Ark that the Echidna War was declared over, as every nation in the world gave in to the threats and terror of the Echidnas. Every country went the way of the Technoclast, destroying cars, TVs, servers, and every electronic device they could find. Robots and machines were turned off, scrapped, and forgotten. Controversially, some countries would heavily regulate their technology instead of complete technoclasm. They would destroy any electronic devices that they could, except those used by the government, of course. Entire cities had gone silent, economies had crashed and burned, and people even feared to go into once grand skyscrapers, until they were eventually forced to, once companies and governments realized they were too useful as workspaces to simply be left to rot. As countries committed to their Balerian jihad, they had very little in the way of instant communication, with only hearsay from letters and word of mouth, and the lack of knowledge of attacks being the evidence that the Echidnas were satisfied. Ivo was not satisfied. His destiny, his ambitions, his future, it was over. All of his amazing talents, 1 in a billion genius, his fate to be the messiah of a technological utopia, were gone. Even his own family, the ones who were the most giving in their praises and idolatry, now shunned and cursed his genius in robotics out of fear and superstition. Ivo, still only a child, was lost. He knew that there was no one else out there like him, and he didn't need his heart to tell him that. He only needed the looks in the eyes of those who once worshipped him to see hatred and fear. This left Ivo with a lot of time alone, a lot of time to ponder about what it all meant. It was during this time of pondering that the young boy came to a realization that would change not only his fate, but the fate of the world. Ivo realized that man was not moved by bright prophecies of a future utopia, nor was man swayed by the truth, righteousness, or justice demonstrated by heroes. Not even love could make the heart of a man abandon the comfortable path he found himself walking upon. Ivo came to the conclusion that the only thing that could really move a man, that could really change the nature of a man, was strength. With strength, the Echidnas had used terror to send the very meaning of xenophobia into the bones of every man, woman, and child who lived in the world. All except for Ivo Robotnik. At once, this revelation was both horrifying, yet freeing. It made Ivo realize that his childhood was over. But the revelation also calcified what he needed to do in order to realize his dream of a technological utopia. Ivo would grow an insular man, those around him staying away because of his love for robotics, and those that tried to get close, he would push away. Ivo tried to remain silent to the jeers and derisions thrown at him, but his patience wore thin by the time he started university. Now a man, Ivo's confidence in himself and his ego had reached the boiling point. He began giving speeches, preaching about the mistake that was destroying technology when they were all so close to a technological utopia. Ivo's speeches made him very unpopular with both the student body and the staff, who now favored the ways of nature. Their collective mass rejection of him and his ideas were suffocating. But Ivo knew the power of strength now, so he forbade himself to give in. Ivo would go from giving speeches at one moment to doing debates in another, sometimes even missing classes to try and prove his points. One of Ivo's most notable and controversial debate speeches was about nature, and it almost got him kicked out of the university.
You fool! Your nature is stagnant and faulty. I find it pitiful and wanting compared to the technological marvels of my youth. Phones, satellites, robots. All of these things you have forgotten in your hurried love for nature, not because you have put them from your mind, but because if you remembered them, you would be like me. I was promised to bring about a new age of technology and prosperity as a child, and I still can. But to do so, I must create a world free of nature and its flaws that you hide behind, fearing the world of tomorrow. I will be the egg from which a perfect world of metal will be born.
The speech became infamous throughout the university, especially the analogy where he compared himself to an egg. From this, a nickname was given mockingly to Ivo, the Eggman. The Eggman became the go-to way people referred to him behind his back, as a way to mock both his beliefs and his weight, as Ivo was a very round man. Despite the intentions of those around him to belittle him, Ivo took a liking to the name, especially its origins from the speech that he made. Over time, he took it on as a moniker, favoring it more than his birth name. After all, an egg has the potential for the creation of life, and from this egg, would spring a life of metal. He is the Eggman. Despite the technoclasm, Eggman still created and patented his robotic creations, and hypocritically, companies and governments would purchase the rights to use some of these robots, if only behind closed doors. Despite being able to replicate them, no one was able to decipher how Eggman's machines worked, with many of them seemingly crammed with red herrings, but without them, the robots didn't work. Of course, after all this time, anyone who approached Eggman to ask him for help deciphering his robots would be sneered at and ignored. Although he made his opinions clear when one of his elders asked for help, as he held them all responsible for throwing away his opportunity of a lifetime to be their messiah squarely at their feet. Despite Eggman preaching that he would be the Eggman of the new age, that he would twist the natural world to do his bidding and reforge it in metal, everyone believed it all to be only hot air. Then, one fateful day, after amassing a fortune using his supposedly cursed robot patents, Ivo Robotnik disappeared. The only knowledge of him still being alive were the occasional withdrawals from his financial accounts. Eventually, even those would stop, and the truth of Ivo Robotnik became history for his family, city, and university. Then, as people left or died, he became a myth. And after an even longer while, the legend of the Eggman, of the prodigy turned technomaniac, was forgotten. But while the legend left their lips, the truth of the Eggman lived on. In fact, it was only just beginning. As the Sonic franchise is well known for its songs, I have given each Sonic character a song that describes who they are, their story, or what they are going through in each era. The song I would use for Eggman is Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. Next time on Ultimate Sonic, we shall begin the story of Sonic the Hedgehog 1991. But as you can tell by the time left in this video, I have something more to say. A raven was sent to my abode. Wrapped around its mangled foot was a message from a faraway land, written by a faraway friend. It read, "Hark! There has been an alliance made between Detective Comics and IDW Sonic." I was astonished. I had thought DC and Sonic did not care for one another. Their communications in the light must have been outweighed by those cloaked in shadow. It was at this moment of realization that I perchance saw a second parchment from my friend, a folded note but 5 and 2 times. The note, which was as tiny as the tip of my thumb, sprawled upon my tabletop, and painted on the parchment were 6 Sonic figures clad in DC superhero disguises. It was a poster for the eyes of the marketgoers. Each of the costumes worn were of the most popular heroes from DC. While understandable, and perhaps enough to sway the masses to buy into this alliance, but for one such as myself, I found the costumes worn by the Sonic characters left me rather disappointed. As my eyes rolled over the details of each piece, each line and shade, I thought to myself, perchance this could be morphed into a lesson in creativity, for there is a lot of missed potential in these chosen heroes. I will now show you the fruits of my thought experiment, what I believe to be the better costumes to adorn for each of the Sonic characters. Sonic as the Flash works for their powers, but beyond that, their similarities only have loose connections. While functional, I believe leaning more into the thematics of what Sonic represents matters more than what he can do, as he is meant to serve as the inspiration for those who see and judge his actions. It is in this that I look to the moral anchor of DC, and I look to Superman. The powers of Sonic and Superman are not a match, but their roles in their best stories feature them as the teachers of lessons, moral centers to be looked up to, both by the people within the world and without. The heinous crimes of Lost World are easily forgotten, but to be so blatantly reminded of them brings a sickness to my heart and soul. A great injustice has been done to Tails for having us remember his cyborg form, and there is a clear alternative that Tails should have adorned, but he is not as popular or marketable: Mr. Terrific. Being the third smartest man on Earth within the DC universe, he is a grand inventor of machines and technologies never before seen by man. Tails too is a wizard with technology and machinery, a genius beyond his years. Also, Tails' name starts with a T, or rather his nickname. The T for terrific on his face still fits. To find an adequate parallel to Knuckles within DC, I had to look far and deep within his character. It didn't take me long to realize that Superman does not fit beyond the two of them being powerful. So I twisted and turned down the avenues of information until I remembered Knuckles' backstory. Being the last of his kind, a kind of ancient people of ancient ways, there could only be one superhero who Knuckles could wear the costume of: Hawkman. As a niche superhero, you most likely do not know of Hawkman, and that's okay. To avoid spoilers, all I will say is Hawkman is haunted by the past in a much more visceral way than even Knuckles. Amy Rose is the embodiment of femininity within the recurring cast of Sonic. She is a normal person, or as normal as a pink hedgehog girl could be, and with that alone, I would come to an impasse. Her role should be filled by that of a love interest, not by a superhero. However, as superheroes are the only ones allowed in this charade, I shall have to pick one of them. Wonder Woman, while the most popular female superhero, does not fit Amy's character, so I looked and pondered until I recalled that Sonic Team has been pushing Amy towards having magical powers. From this niche came a simple conclusion: Zatanna, a normal girl in every way except for the fact she's a true blue magician, or witch. The only one I would not change at all is Shadow, wearing the disguise of Batman. I would not be all too surprised if Batman played a role in Shadow's creation as an inspiration, or in a later game where Shadow appeared. I will give this alliance another praise. They made Silver a lantern, which I very much agree on. However, Silver would not be a Green Lantern. While Silver does have a lot of willpower, the themes for Silver and his story tell me that he would not be powered by will. Silver should be a Blue Lantern, a lantern of hope. To end this experiment of the mind, I would add one thing. Rouge should have been included as Catwoman, seeing as Catwoman was a key inspiration for Rouge. Regrettably, the defeminization of Rouge has made this an impossibility. This side venture was a fine waste of time, for time enjoyed is never wasted. But my real duties shall not perform themselves. I bid you good day, and to walk with goodness in your step.